Chapter 17. Always knowing where you are. It is all very nice if you have the wherewithal to employ a professional guide on your hunting and fishing trip into the backcountry. He will make camp for you and do the cooking and many other chores, permitting you to devote the maximum time to hunting, fishing, photography, or just plain loafing. He will even guide you to the best hunting and fishing grounds, point out the game or bait your hook, and smilingly have the lunch out of his pack sack at midday. When it's time to return to camp, he'll show you the way. The owner of a big sporting camp once told me that none of his patrons ever went home without a deer. How many sportsmen shoot their own deer? I asked him. You ought to know, he replied. About 1/3 are babes in the woods, and the guides shoot a deer for them. But I guess we're rather old-fashioned. Harking back to our pioneer ancestors, we have always thought that the charm of life in the open lies in the complete liberty of action that it affords. The intrinsic allure of outdoor living, it has always seemed to us, is caught up in the soul-satisfying independence of being your own master, and in the deep-down pride that comes from being able to look out for yourself under any circumstance, and in any country or climate. Never getting lost. No one is going to feel confident, relaxed, and utterly at home in the bush until he understands the few very simple principles of finding his way anywhere, and alone or not, of always knowing for sure where he is. There is nothing at all difficult about finding your way through strange wilderness, of always knowing the direction back to camp, and of never getting lost. It is downright easy, in fact, for staying found is just a matter of plain common sense and of keeping your wits about you. But first, let's disabuse ourselves of the commonest of the several utterly false notions that have been formed about this all-important part of wildcraft. No man is born with the innate ability of finding his way out and back through country entirely strange to him. This prowess is acquirable, it is not instinctive. Neither does any human being carry a compass in his head. Even the most intuitive native, who has spent all his years in wild places, can find his way without outside help only through regions with which he is thoroughly familiar. One way of getting back. Probably an Eskimo by the name of Natkusiak, the companion of Vilhjalmur Stephenson, during the dozen years the latter explored the unknown Arctic, was one of the most celebrated native hunters known. You may have already have discovered by personal experience that it is difficult at best to get natives to accompany white explorers into the strange wilds. They talk of being afraid of people they might meet there, who kill all strangers, but most of all, though they seldom say so, they fear becoming lost. Natkusiak was an exception. He had apparently learned the knack of finding his way anywhere at any time. One day the camp was out of meat. There was even fear of starving. Natkusiak started out to hunt. 18 hours later he returned, carrying the heart and liver of a caribou he had killed far off. The next day he started out with his sled to bring in the remainder of the kill, saying he would not be back for almost a day, as it was a great distance away. That afternoon Stephenson went up on a hill about a mile from camp. From that eminence, to his surprise, he saw Natkusiak hauling a sled load of meat and heading away from camp. It seems that the Eskimo's wonderful secret for never getting lost always consisted of always following his trail back. He had wandered about on his hunt, paying no attention to where he was going. He had actually killed the caribou within 2 miles of the encampment, but unaware of this, he had trudged back along the same 20 miles of curving and twisting footprints. He had returned to his kill by the same circuitous route through the snow, and he was once more following the now well-broken trail when Stephenson intercepted him. Any tenderfoot could do that on fresh snow, but no one would have much success at it on the bare ground of North America. The formula. The educated man, although he may have been born in the city and lived there most of his life, makes a far better explorer than any native, as has been proved innumerable times. One reason for this is the fact that knowing where you're going, being sure of where you are, and of always having the certain knowledge of how to get back is no mysterious and negative manner of instinct and mumbo-jumbo. It is, on the other hand, a positive and ever intriguing problem of distance and angles. The formula for all this is not hard to understand. It is not difficult to learn. Everything you need to know is contained in these next few pages. As a matter of fact, most of it is in the next paragraph. We stay found by always knowing just where we are. This is not a complicated nor as contradictory as it may at first glance seem. Even the most inexperienced greenhorn can keep track of his position by the use of a map, a compass, and a pencil. Every 10 minutes or every time he changes direction will not at first be too often to bring that map up to date. What if you have no map? Then, using the camp or road from which you leave as a starting point, you draw one as you go. The wisest old woodsman uses exactly the same technique, whether he is aware of it or not. His map is in his head, that's all. Sun, moon, stars, vegetation, and any number of other natural factors may be his compass. Under it should be thoroughly realized favorable conditions. Compass. The sun and moon have always risen in the east and set in the west. Everyone knows that at midday in the United States and Canada the sun is in the south, and that at midnight so is the full moon. The new moon, concavity to the left, is in the west in the early mornings. The old moon is in the east. The full moon rises in the east and sets in the west. The two outer stars that form the bowl of the Big Dipper point to the North Star, which has the appearance of being about 7 times as far from them as they are from each other. The only difficulty with these primitive ways of reckoning comes in cloudy, stormy, foggy, and otherwise obscure weather. Then everyone in strange country needs a magnetic compass. Moss does not grow on the north side of trees often enough to be a reliable dictator, and a prevailing wind is apt to change direction without being noticed. Even in familiar wilderness, a compass will often save a lot of time that could otherwise be expended on trial and error. There are many questions asked about a compass. Some people think a compass will point the way back to camp. It will do no such thing. A compass can tell you where is north and where reading clockwise, east, south, and west are located. But if you use your bean along with your compass, you can keep from ever being turned around or bewildered. Set any man at all down in country that is strange to him on a day that he can't see sky or previously identified landmarks, and he will quickly get hopelessly turned around unless he has a magnetic compass. What he'll probably do, if he's an experienced outdoorsman, is camp until the weather clears. If any man tells you he never uses a compass, put it down that he never gets beyond country that is thoroughly familiar to him. However, many woodsmen are so used to navigating in the way we're going to describe, they think they have an infallible sense of direction. If this were true, you could put them out from the south shore of Great Bear Lake in a canoe on a misty black night, and they'd instinctively know exactly in which direction to paddle. What is north? Using a compass is a very simple matter if you approach it with an open mind. If in the United States and Canada you place a magnetic compass away from metal on a flat surface and let the needle settle down, it will point north. That is, it will point to the magnetic north. This is a shifting point up above Hudson Bay in extreme northeastern Canada, almost due north of the center of Ohio. In the state of Washington, the needle points east of true north about 20 degrees. In Maine, the declination runs about 20 degrees west. Although this is not technically exact, it is in general accurate enough for everyday travel. Actually, the entire Earth is a magnet, causing the declination to vary at different spots. In some localities, this may be as much as 15 degrees away from the magnetic shift indicated on ordinary maps. To determine the declination from true north with fair accuracy, find the North Star. This lies almost exactly over the North Pole, being only slightly more than 1 degree away from precise north. You can then either note immediately the variation between almost exact north and where your compass needle is pointing, or you can scratch a line pointing to the pole star or indicate it by using stakes, and in daylight compare your compass to the thus established north-south mark. The declination must be taken into consideration when you're reading a map. As a matter of fact, it is marked on many maps. If no compass directions are shown on the particular chart you are using, north may be assumed to be at the top, this being the way most are laid out. What compass to buy? Your compass need not be an expensive model. Choose one, however, in which the north end of the needle is unmistakably marked, perhaps by being shaped like an arrow. Some varieties simply have one end of the pointer white and the other end black. When someone is mixed up, he often can't remember which is which, particularly at some imports. We have seen reverse the usual procedure of letting the more prominent end indicate north. You may prefer a compass whose entire dial moves. Compasses are inexpensive. You may as well get a good one, although there is no need, nor is it advisable, to burden yourself with one of elaborate surplus device designed more for military use or for surveying. Get a good small compass and one that is rugged and preferably waterproof. Keep it where you will be sure not to lose it. It is not a bad idea to carry a tiny spare in real wilderness. There seems to be no good reason to buy a compass that does not have a luminous indicator. The secret of staying found. There are two kinds of maps. One is the mind map, which you keep in your head as you go along. The other is the more or less accurate published map. Your mind map, plus plain ordinary common sense, will keep you from getting turned around or lost. If for any reason whatsoever you have the slightest doubt of being able to retain this map accurately in your head, then sketch it on a piece of paper as you go along. Let us illustrate exactly how you use it. Suppose you've camped the night before in a country utterly strange to you. It is now morning and you elect to go hunting or trapping alone. You grab a lunch and, as shown in sketch A, you head north for 2 hours. Time in a wilderness, as you will no doubt agree, a far more reliable indicator of distance than trying to estimate it in miles. Then, for some reason best known to yourself, you turn to the right and hike east for another 2 hours. On the first course, you detour around a swamp. On the second, you curve around the base of a steep and rocky hill. You make allowance for both of these detours in your time-distance record. At this point, it will furthermore be perfectly plain that if you travel a little less than 3 hours southwest over the same type of country, you will arrive right back at the camp from where you started. The entire secret of finding your way and not getting lost lies in this little example. You must always know where you have gone, and by this knowledge always approximately where you are. If you cannot rely on your memory, then it is only advisable to sketch a map showing these two essentials. Whenever you know where you have been and where you now are, you will always know the way back. This is not nearly as complex as it may sound. In fact, it is not complicated at all. You merely keep oriented, and using a watch if you want, you keep count of how far you go in each direction. The map, if you elect to draw one, can be as simple as sketch A. As you gain experience, following this procedure becomes more and more easy, but it is really foolproof from the start. That old woodsman whose ability to find his way anywhere under all conditions you so admire has used this system for so many years that it has become second nature to him. In all likelihood, he now follows it with scarcely a conscious thought. Most of us have come across old bushmen who tell us that they find their way naturally and that they never get confused. Many of them insist on this until we pin them down with direct and pertinent questions. Then we always find that stored in their noodles are detailed and accurate mind maps. Now there are certain complications to this technique, as there are to every simple example. But as we come to each of these, you will see that the solution in every instance merely a matter of sound judgment. When camped on river, etc. Suppose your camp is located beside a river, tote road, or some similar boundary. For purpose of illustration, let us assume, if we may, that this landmark runs east and west as indicated in sketch B. Someone who has never tried this in unfamiliar country may think that he could hunt all day north of this line and then, in late afternoon, merely head south with the assurance that he would surely come back to it and then be able to follow it to camp. But which way should he turn upon reaching it? If he headed in the wrong direction, he might hike for miles and get nowhere. The most professional solution to this basic problem, which in one form or another confronts every outdoorsman innumerable times, is to aim deliberately at one side or another of the goal. The best technique, in other words, is never in strange country to attempt to hit a blind object of this sort on the nose. If you miss it, you'll have no better than a 50-50 chance of turning in the correct direction. For all practical purposes, the gamble is not even half and half. The human tendency, if you are not sure you've chosen the right way, is to give up too soon and turn back, only to have to come back over the same ground later. If you bear positively to one side or the other of a long boundary, upon reaching it, you will know for certain which way to turn. Be sure of your landmark. There is one basic precaution to follow in this regard. Be sure of your road, river, lake, or other such boundary. Rivers cut back on themselves. Roads, particularly in the woods, sometimes come to abrupt ends in the midst of nowhere. Lake country, as you appreciate, can be particularly deceptive. You may, of course, have a reliable map of the country, preferably checked by a dependable local inhabitant that will resolve any such doubt. In any event, only use facts of which you are sure on which to base your procedure. If you ever reach a camp along that strange road, aim for the particular side of it which you have personal knowledge. Keeping oriented. When you start out in the morning, suppose you follow the little brook shown in sketch B up into the hills. You hunt there all day, keeping a careful record of your directions and distances. Toward evening, on your way back, you come to a little brook. You think to yourself, let us assume, for purposes of illustration, why here's that brook again. I may as well follow it down to camp. You start off along the bank. You go along beside it a long way and get nowhere. You realize that somewhere along the way you've miscalculated. The trouble is that when you went up that brook in the morning, you did not note its various twists, formations, shores, bars, pools, chutes, and other peculiarities. If you had, when you came to that second brook in the afternoon, you would have soon realized it was not the same one. You would have oriented yourself and made a beeline for where you knew camp to be. You can still do that by, at worst, retracing your steps to where you went wrong. This same general error can be made in relation to tote roads, game trails, watersheds, and other such features. It is best never to rely too positively on such landmarks, but instead to stay oriented all the time and to keep track of your distance. Then you will always know just about where you are. Dense flat country. Suppose your camp is in dense level country where there are no landmarks. Suppose, for example, you are in thick jungle, as were many of my camps when I was exploring in Central America. How are you going to leave camp and in the morning travel all day in trackless wilderness so thick that often you cannot see the flaming sun, and return surely and silently to your outfit at night? The most practical procedure is to prepare for your return while still in contact with camp. You and your companion can do this by running blazed lines for a half mile or so northeast, south, and west from camp. This will give you an objective for all practical purposes, a mile or so in diameter at which to aim. In this situation, you will keep very close track of your whereabouts. You will increase your margin for error by trying to hit this particular target plumb center. Once you have struck one of these 4 radii, you will be able to follow it right into camp. 2 blazes on the side of each tree towards the camp will show you which way to turn. 1 blaze will do on the outgoing sides. The usual blaze in the woods, as you know, is made by chipping a piece of bark from a tree trunk so as to expose a conspicuous white patch of wood beneath. These are commonly at about eye level. You sometimes come across a very high line of blazes in the north woods, puzzling until you realize that they were made by a trapper on snowshoes. Each succeeding spot in any event will be clearly visible from the one preceding. Changes of directions, in particular, should be clearly indicated. For a temporary mark, you can break occasional small branches, taking care to leave the back route plainly evident. This is an understandable objection in national parks and national forests to all varieties of marking which damage natural growth. The Appalachian Trail, for example, uses a dab of paint on trees and rocks to indicate trails. Open country. The variations already considered, although they hold true everywhere, pertain mostly to the wooded terrain, where you cannot get much of an extended view, and where each swamp and glade and green bedecked hill looks pretty much like every other. In the much more milieu that characterizes much of the continental West, it is generally far easier to keep track of your whereabouts. This is often to a considerable degree, however, by the fact that This is offset to a considerable degree, however, by the fact that uninhabited distances are often so tremendous and the country many times so stark and rough that one cannot afford to take chances. In some of the rugged mountains where we've camped, our objective has been in sight and yet more than a week away if we'd tried to walk straight to it. Under such circumstances, the important question often becomes less one of where camp is than of how to get there. Generally speaking, however, finding your way about is often so easy that it hardly requires a thought, with one important exception. In case of storm or sudden obscure weather, you should always be able to get to where you are going by compass. Otherwise, for example, let's assume that 2 miles due west of your camp there is a hill with a peculiar shaped rock prominence atop it. You can see this conspicuous eminence for miles. It will change its outline slightly as you travel. By keeping track of this, you can gauge just exactly where your camp lies in relationship to it. If you keep looking back and noting the appearance of things, you'll easily be able to journey back over the same route. What to do if lost? If during your ordinary wanderings you suddenly discover you are not sure of your whereabouts, keep your shirt on and don't get excited. You are in no danger at all. You needn't even undergo any particular discomfort, especially if you have a knife and some matches that are safe from dampness. At the very worst, all you are in for is perhaps missing a couple of meals, and that is nothing. The very real peril that can beset someone who is or who believes himself lost commonly arises from mental attitudes rather than from any physical circumstances. It is a disturbing comment on civilization that apparently stable city men, particularly those who for the first time are in what is actually the human race's natural habitat, will sometimes lose all rationality when they discover they are not sure of exactly where they are. Many, when they are rescued, are completely unbalanced and in a pitiable state. There is nothing unusual about going astray. If such a situation is new to you, the best thing to do is to sit down, let your muscles go as completely slack as possible, and begin thinking things over calmly. It will usually help if you go about your reasoning logically. A simple way to start is by asking yourself, what's the trouble? That's easy. You don't know where you are in relation to where you want to go. In the vernacular, you're lost. Once you've accepted that fact, ask yourself another question. So what is the worst that can happen to you? Well, you can starve, yes, but on the other hand, if a man doesn't unnecessarily exhaust himself, he can go 4 weeks without food. Besides, in a pinch, even the inner bark of some such very common trees as birch, poplar, and the numerous evergreens will furnish nourishment. All cacti are good to eat. In the Arctic, all vegetation is edible except for one species of mushroom, although you'll want to soak the bitterness out of some of the lichens. All freshwater fish on this continent are edible, and so are all birds and all animals. You probably won't starve then, but what about wild beasts? As a matter of fact, there is no wild animal in all North America that's dangerous to a man who does not provoke it. What next? Well, you are expected to back by nightfall, and you don't want to worry anyone. Of course, you don't want to worry anyone. That's one reason you're not going to blunder along inanely and maybe get into real trouble. If worst comes to worst, you can build a fire and sleep safely right here. It'll be a lot better to take care of yourself and let those who are waiting for you be a little anxious for a few hours than to give them something really to worry about. So that much is settled. If there is a real woodsman in your camp, you can take it easy right where you are. He will find you without any particular difficulty by at least the next morning. But if you start moving around, that can be another matter entirely. You may roam right out of the area of search, so why not select a cheerful spot nearby? Collect a lot of dry firewood and go about preparing yourself an overnight bivouac. When viewed from retrospect, as a matter of fact, it'll probably be the high point of your trip. Agree beforehand. If you are in the wilderness with a party, the sensible thing to do is to agree among yourselves beforehand exactly how you all are going to proceed in any such emergencies. There is no more than a fundamental precaution. Even the most experienced woodsman can have an accident that will immobilize him and make help necessary. Just to mention one possibility, a branch from a dead tree might fall and break a leg. Such an Standing may include the argument that anyone lost or otherwise in distress shall fire on the hour 3 shots that are evenly spaced about 10 seconds apart. Fired at appreciable intervals in this way and on the hour, these would patiently be distress shots and not merely casual shooting at an animal. Furthermore, anyone alerted by hearing the first shot or the second would have a good chance to determine the direction. Besides, if your companions suspect you may be lost, they will be listening for you on the hour. They may answer you and they may not, depending upon your arrangements and on a number of other factors. It may be that for one reason or another, such as wind direction, they may not hear those particular shots at all. In any case, sit tight. If you move and your friends hearing the shots come to where they sounded from, they would not find you there. Above all, do not try to travel during the night. That's plumb dangerous. Not only are you apt to go really astray, but there is a great danger of sticking a limb into your eye or falling over a bank in the dark. You'll do a lot better to stay where you are, to repeat your shots each hour up to pitch dark, if you can, and in the meantime to get enough dry wood together to keep up a hearty and warming fire during the night. If you are short on ammunition, the most auspicious time to signal is at dusk when the wind usually quits, and when, if you are not already back in camp, your companions will be most likely to be listening for it. There are numerous other ways of signaling, too, with fire or smoke, by flashing with a mirror or any other bright surface, by thumping a hollow log or dead tree, and by innumerable other procedures that'll suggest themselves if the situation demands. Getting out by yourself. If there's no woodsman back in camp, then it may be advisable for you to try to find your own way out. You should travel only during the daylight hours, however, unless there are grave reasons for you to do otherwise. On the desert, to cite one exception, you'd do better in hot weather to lie up during the day in shade, digging a narrow east-west slit for this purpose if necessary. Whatever you do, you should proceed systematically. One way to commence it is to sit down and smooth off a piece of ground on which you can scratch a map with a stick. In what direction did you start off from camp in the morning? That information, incidentally, should be exchanged daily between all members of the party. It is not a bad idea either if you start out alone, either from a solitary camp or from a parked automobile, to leave a message in some prominent place stating your probable whereabouts and the expected time of your return. Now that you're making a map, put in every detail that you can remember. It's remarkable how many times a seemingly unanswerable situation will clear up completely once you start applying concrete logic to it. How long ago was it when you knew just where you were? If this was only an hour before, then you probably have not traveled more than a mile or so since that time. You therefore know within that distance just where your camp is. Draw whatever you are sure of on the map. Is the camp on a river? If so, you have a long boundary to shoot at. The river runs from west to east, and your outfit is on the north shore, so you head south. Are you by any chance in the wooded area crisscrossed by country roads? Then traveling in any direction in a straight line will bring you out. Is there a hill nearby from where you may be able to see a telltale lake or mountain range? Perhaps an easy climb pine will put you in a position to locate where you are. What about sounds? Automobile horns indicate roads, locomotive whistles probably miles of track, some sounds of chopping carry far, and so does the bark of a dog. Perhaps you can see or smell smoke from a stove or campfire. Possibly you can glimpse some sort of light at night. If you spot the latter, watch and find out all you can about it. In most cases, staying safely where you are and marking the direction so that you will be sure of it in the morning. When you realize you are lost, you are not apt to be very far out of the way, so in attempting to get back, be sure to keep orientated. You can head in a straight line. This you can do without sun or compass by keeping two objects such as trees always lined up ahead of you. Before you reach the nearer of these, select another that maintains the direction, or you can travel in a generally straight course, picking the easiest route and averaging the changes of directions. The latter technique, although usually preferable and in some terrain absolutely necessary, requires much more attention. If you have the slightest doubt about what you are doing, carefully blaze or otherwise spot your way as you proceed. You will then be able to get back to where you started from and at center to try another route. Furthermore, such markings may very well help your friends to find you. If someone may be searching for you, don't ever quit a camp without leaving information about where you're heading. Getting mixed up. Despite high water and the other place, you will occasionally get mixed up for a time. A little thought and common sense, however, will usually straighten you out. I can recall a dozen instances where I got messed up, all due to my own carelessness. Here's one of those instances. It was in heavily wooded lake country. The day was clouded over. I had a fair map of the region. I arrived at the point marked 1, intending to go to the lake at the top of the map along the route shown by the dotted line. It was obvious that all I had to do was to fight my way for 100 yards through the alder swamps and then around Hill A, with the slope dropping off to my right until I struck the lake. It was also obvious that I paid on attention to my compass, intending to be guided by the contour of the hill. Except for the slope, the place was so wooded you could not see for any distance. I crossed the thick alder swamp, but there was where I made my mistake. Without realizing it, I got turned too much to my left in the swamp. When I came out onto firm ground, there was a gentle slope slanting off to my right. I followed on around as shown by the dash line, still not looking at my compass. I reached the first question mark, no lake. So I climbed up on top of Hill B to the second question mark. Still no lake. Where was I, and what had I done? So for the first time I got out my compass, and then it was obvious that I had circled around to the left. It was also perfectly obvious that if I steered south, I would strike the little river and be able to follow it up to the lake, which I did. Townsend Whelen. What about following streams? The advice is often repeated that when anyone seems hopelessly turned around, all he has to do is follow a brook or river downhill. This, it has been said numerous times, will lead one to civilization sooner or later. The theory sometimes even takes swamps into consideration and recommends that one should skirt these on their higher side. Less prudently, it occasionally adds that if you can't find running water to follow, you have a good chance of locating it by climbing down into a canyon or ravine. The whole idea of the advisability of lost men heading along streams, however reasonable it may sound, to someone who has never been in real wilderness, is actually impractical in the extreme. You might travel down some rivers for as many days and weeks as you could keep going, and you would end up even further from human habitation. Such a route, furthermore, would almost surely lead you through the roughest and thickest sort of going, if not into valleys and muskegs dangerously impassable, or you might very well come to a tributary river you could not ford. Walking out. If you know of a well-defined road or a large lake with settlements on it that lays in a certain direction, even though it is a couple of days away, you might head for this as a last resort. For instance, if you were about 25 miles west of the Alaskan Highway, you could travel generally east with the assurance that if you keep going, you'll surely come to it. But any time you are really lost and happen upon something such as a power line or a telephone wire strung through the woods, do not pass it by, because you may have some other sign of habitation in your mind. If you come to a road, do not cross it and continue on into more wilderness just because it does not seem to be the one you are looking for. Such a precaution would seem at first glance so elementary as not to merit mentioning, but even in Alaska highway country, where if one passes the 1,600-mile thoroughfare, he will, in some cases, not encounter another though he proceeded to the Pacific Ocean or to Hudson's Bay or to the Arctic Ocean. The tracks of some lost men have showed that they crossed this unmistakable wilderness turnpike 2 and 3 times and yet plunged right back into the bush. Common sense. Whenever you go into strange country, be sure to keep a mind map of your whereabouts. This is a great deal easier than it sounds. It gets to be second nature with just a little practice. But suppose in the excitement of the chase you forgot to keep such a map up to date. There's still nothing to worry about. Again, you simply use common sense, sit down and draw a rough map from your memory up to the point where half an hour ago you wounded that buck and started after him. You are now not more than 1.5 miles from that point. Take a course, say north. Take a course, say north for a mile and a half. You won't be able to use time in this instance, for you are going to mark your route. Then, if you do not come to the place where the buck was shot, return to the point of confusion. From there, set off in another line, which you also blaze. Pretty soon, one of these radii will take you near enough to where you wounded the deer that you'll recognize where you are. Never thereafter need you fear that you will get lost in any country. Messed up worse. When big wet flakes began tumbling thick along the lodgepole pines the first winter I was lucky enough to stay in the subarctic forest, I still needed a well-larded bear. 15 minutes from the gleaming newness of my log cabin, I picked up a trapper's trail heading true north along an old survey line. Although this trail hadn't been cut out for a couple of years, travel over it was far easier than in the bush. Besides, it slanted up a series of benches where bears had been working on bushes to which a few Saskatoons still clung. Sure enough, I picked up a fresh track and had a packload of plump young bruin back on the trail by 10 a.m. The snow had stopped by then, the sun was bright on its thinness, and a dry, warm Chinook wind was feathering flakes from the trees. It was too fine a day to head back so soon, so I kept following the trail, which continued north for the first hour and a half through a jackpot left by fire. At 12:15, it doubled back downhill somewhere toward a swamp. I decided to keep up on what was now a high poplar flat. This I did, continuing north at the same pace with my shadow generally straight ahead of me, but a trifle to the left until I cut a brook at 1 p.m. Here I boiled a kettle for half an hour. The Chinook was really whipping through the open country by then. I'd been figuring on following my tracks easily back to the trail, ambling leisurely along the fast and easy going to my loaded pack, and being at the cabin by dark. No snow. Now what? Should I head back due south and try to hit the north-south trail on the nose? Pretty slim chance. Should I travel south 1 hour at the same pace and then start zigzagging southeast and southwest, extending these lines until I cross the trail? Too long. What I finally did was head south-southwest, where the walking seemed better than on the other slant, for an hour and a half at the speed I'd been traveling all day. I was then sure that the trapper's trail lay a few minutes east of me, which it did. Bradford, Angier.